Assimilation versus Liberation is applied to Lord of the Rings by JRR Tolkien. Assimilation, as defined by the Sage Encyclopedia of LGBTQ Studies, is seeking to pursue greater rights and access for LGBTQ communities within existing social and political contexts and institutions. Common assimilationist fights include legalizing gay marriage, the Don't Ask, Don't Tell military policy, and legislative lobbying for AIDS prevention, development, and research. Requirements to joining the mainstream is to tone it down and erase the parts of LGBTQ culture that don't fit into mainstream American ideals. Most often it is marginalized groups such as trans people or queer people of color and their stories that are left behind. Important stories that tell the ways our society oppresses them, while queer white people gain the most benefits from assimilation. Liberation, as defined by the Sage Encyclopedia of LGBTQ Studies, is transforming or restructuring society overall, as opposed to working for inclusion in existing institutions. Common liberationist fights are the Stonewall Rebellion, alliances with civil rights organizations such as the Black Panthers and the anti-war movement, and fights against rainbow capitalism. Liberation is a radical antithesis to assimilation. It argues to ditch our current society that values colonial, sexist, racist, homophobic, ableist, classist ideals and institutions, to instead build something better. Liberation seeks to uplift the marginalized people and stories left behind by assimilationism and bring them to the forefront. One valuable way to interact with and learn from these ideologies is to apply them as a framework for literary analysis. Conducting a liberationist analysis on Lord of the Rings was at the forefront Molly Knox Ostertag. During the pandemic, cartoonist and TV writer Molly Knox Ostertag became popular on Twitter for her queer readings of JRR Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. Her analysis focused on the homoerotic relationship between the two protagonists, Frodo and Sam. She mainly drew comics that went along with quotes from the series, where Sam and Frodo often kiss, hug, and sleep together. This popularity grew and culminated in her writing a queer analysis of Lord of the Rings in an article for Polygon. Since fantasy has been dominated by white, cis, heterosexual men, Molly Knox Ostertag received a very harsh reaction for writing this. The naysayers often use assimilationist readings to justify the erasure of Sam and Frodo's queer relationship. The assimilationist readings were taken from an article that was released about a week before Molly Knox Ostertag's article by Zev Shavat, analyzing how Lord of the Rings portrayed positive masculine traits through the actions of two different male characters. This kind of platonic brotherhood works when applied to Aragorn and Boromir's relationship, but the fans took this analysis and applied it to Frodo and Sam's relationship, a relationship that was decidedly romantic and could be interpreted as sexual. This was used to deny any possibility of queerness from being discussed in a fandom that is largely straight, and to reinforce that Lord of the Rings still follows puritanical, colonial, and capitalist morality. Even the movies by Peter Jackson take this assimilationist route by portraying Sam and Frodo's relationship as brother-like, and not including any of the more tender scenes between them. Not only do these analyses help us understand the story better, but they also have far-reaching effects in society at large. By using the assimilationist tactic of sterilizing Frodo and Sam's sexuality and turning their relationship to that of a platonic brotherhood, it erases the possibility of queerness in the fantasy world invented by Tolkien. It also erases the queer experiences Tolkien himself had in the repressed Catholic world of Britain in the early to mid-1900s. Tolkien had a close relationship with the poet W.H. Auden, who was openly gay at the time when it was often a death sentence. Tolkien taught, admired, and befriended the openly lesbian Mary Renault. Tolkien's childhood friend Joffrey Bach Smith, a writer of homoerotic poetry, died in battle during World War II, and his last letter was sent to Tolkien. These were all queer experiences of Tolkien that may have made their way into Lord of the Rings through Sam and Frodo's relationship. By erasing Sam and Frodo's relationship, you erase Tolkien's experience and the queer struggles that took place in an oppressive era. Lord of the Rings was also the main inspiration for the creation of popular tabletop RPG Dungeons & Dragons. D&D has ebbed and flowed in popularity since then, but it has recently come back into the spotlight in popular D&D shows like Critical Role and Dimension 20. These days, there's an often talked about split in the community where people feel like they're playing two different games. D&D features tactical combat and role-playing as its two major draws. So-called straight D&D focuses on combat and loot, while gay D&D focuses on role-playing and storytelling. Reading Lord of the Rings with the assimilationist approach has an even further damaging reach to the D&D community. If queerness is excluded in Lord of the Rings, and if Lord of the Rings is the main source of material for D&D, then it is also invalidated in the D&D community. Popular queer podcasts like Transplanar and Dungeons & Drag Queens wouldn't have a place in the community if the assimilationist approach was taken to Lord of the Rings and to D&D. The liberationist interpretation was required to carve out a queer space in the larger fantasy community, and it has worked, as we are seeing less reactionary responses and more people of all oppressed backgrounds feeling comfortable in the fantasy community, seen in podcasts like The Three Black Halflings.